Hey guys, my name is VaulSC, hope that you are doing well. In this video we're going to be talking about the 100 Kingdoms, which is the faction for Conquest, the Last Argument of Kings by Para Bellum. I will be going into an in-depth review of the entire faction. We're going to be talking about overall strategy, we're going to talk about the faction abilities, we're going to be deep diving into each character and regiment, and if we get time, some of the magic items. And so long as the video isn't like a couple of hours, we'll talk about a couple of example lists for 100 Kingdoms. So I hope that you enjoy this and stick with me throughout. I know that from other YouTube videos I've done in the past that army spotlights and reviews and strategy guides are very, very popular. So I hope this will, be something very useful for you, especially if you're a newer player. A few disclaimers that we have to get out of the way before we get into this is that, number one, this is being recorded on the 16th of March 2024, my time, and these videos tend to go out of date quite quickly. So if you're watching this video and it happens to be a long time after this is posted, it may be the case that the game has been updated, things have changed a bit, and some of the things in this video will be out of date. What I'm going to try and do is do an army sort of review and breakdown for every faction over time, but I'm going to have to come back and re-record some of the earlier ones because Para Bellum's doing a great job of putting out balance patches and making changes and releasing new things, so I'm going to have to keep it up to date with that. But there are some things in the faction that will always be pretty much the same, and a lot of the stuff will be fairly timeless, or at least long-lasting, if I can put it that way. Now, 100 Kingdoms is a very strong faction. They're the faction that I play the most, they're my main, and in terms of the power ranking of Conquest factions, I don't know what the order is right now, but I can tell you that 100 Kingdoms has been in the top 50% for a long time and currently is, partly due to the power of some of their best regiments like the Ashen Dawn, but also because their faction abilities generally are very strong and they're a very versatile faction. I quite like them because there are several different viable ways that you can build them. When you look at some of the less interesting factions like Dwegom, would be my other example, although Twig is my other faction, I like them too. They're a little bit more limited in sort of what viable builds you can make for the competitive style of the game. Cool. One last thing, if you check out this link up here, there is a how to play Conquest video, which I made recently, which I'm very proud of, featuring a lot of my little stop motions. I'm going to recycle them a little bit in this video. But the main thing is that I just want you guys to be aware of some of the more high effort stuff that I put out on YouTube. So please give that a look. It's got some wonderful little bits of acting and animations and sound effects and things. So please do check that out. Righty then, let's just bring this webcam down a little bit and we're going to go to Army Builder, and the rest of the video is really going to be about this Army Builder right here, which you can find on your cell phone or on the interwebs. Let's just do this a different way. Yeah, no, this is fine. Okay, so overview here, you've got Veterans and you've got Relentless Drill. And this is the first thing we're going to talk about. So both of these, I'm really glad to say, are very viable options. It's not just a matter of everybody always choosing one or the other of them. I'm not going to go into a drill down and sort of read out every word of the actual rules. You guys can do that on your own. I sort of more want to commentate on why you might want to sort of take these rules and the effect of them. But the idea is that with Veterans, that is more of an ability that affects units that have impact attacks mostly. So when you're running a lot of Household Knights, if you're running like a mounted army, if you bought one of those box sets where it's just mostly cavalry sort of stuff, having +1 clash from Veterans, where you select it here, allows you to have +1 to hit basically on not just the Knight's impact hits, but the clash as well. So you're getting a bit of a double dip, and that's why it can be worth it, especially if you have a larger regiment of Knights, like 5 of them plus the Noble Lord. You're taking Speed of Horse for the +1 impact and reroll 6s, so you're really just going to get so many more hits by having the Knights as Veterans. The Tawny Champion normally costs 25. He's doubled up to 50 when you have the Veterans there. So you're paying 25 points to have essentially +1 on all of your clash attacks, but more importantly, all of your impact attacks. And you don't necessarily have to buy it for your smaller units, although you'd probably still be encouraged to. The other sort of thing that veterans can be very good for is specifically the Honda Cadre, because, again, to have veterans, you need to be able to take both a standard bearer and an officer. So your null mage, it goes from 15 to 30. And that's going to mean that for 15 points, you can get +1 clash or volley. Some people still do like clash because they treat the Hunter Cadre as a combat unit, and they can fight, but the better option in my view is usually going to be volley, because the idea is that you want to sort of keep these guys at relatively long range and look for a unit of brutes or a monster to shoot at, and they're going to be very effective at volley 3 with the rerolls from Fiend Hunter. One thing you can do in the current patch with the Imperial Officer is you can take the battlefield drills to give them these bonuses, like fire first, aim later, aim for the head. So this is fire in advance. They can move after shooting, and aim for the head. It causes resolve checks if you shoot at half range, like the effective range. And then maybe you've got an extra member of Hunter Cadre. You go to the heirlooms. The next upgrade you could get is Eye of Achilles, where you reroll 6s on shooting. So the entire unit basically, and if you want to go overboard, you could give this guy marksmanship or long lineage, kiss farewell, whatever you want to do there, but it's expensive. But the damage output here, when you have volley 3 rather than 2 from veterans, becomes very, very strong. All in all, veterans is at its best when you're using it on the knights and Hunter Cadre, but you can't actually get any benefit from veterans at all from the Priory Commanders units, because they can't have a unit champion as well as a standard bearer. It can be beneficial for the Theist Priest and his militia. It can be beneficial for the Noble Lord and his Household Guard. The thing with Household Guard, though, is that if you take the officer for the Arms Master, it says when the Noble Lord is in the unit, they get +1 clash instead. So they go up to clash 3. And they may be rerolling 6s anyway from Best of Men. So if you have, for example, veterans on them to take them up to effectively clash 4 once they've got the Arms Buster, Inspiring will allow reroll 6s, but the Warlord ability will allow reroll 6s as well. So it's a little bit of an overlap in ability, so you're spending for a normal upgrade without really getting the full extent of that upgrade, and that's why overall I feel like veterans is more of an upgrade for armies that are very heavy on Household Knights and wanting to be using Hunter Cadre. The other upgrade, which I personally use almost exclusively, only gives you infantry +1 support. So if you're running a cavalry army, it's not really worth it. And if you're running an army where there are lots of small units, like you've got 3 Steel Legion here and you've got 3 Men-at-Arms here, and nobody's really making any support attacks to begin with, you're not really getting anything out of it. The overall reason, though, why I prefer Relentless Drill is that in some situations, you're getting effectively a side grade, where let's say you've got these militia and you got, say, 6 of them. You take the standard bearer and you take the Servite so that they get +1 resolve, they can survive longer, and they get extra speed. The priest, mind you, is resolve 2, so he can't really boost the unit's resolve, but the Servite will allow that. He's movement 5, but the Servite excuse me, gives the character +1 march as well as the unit, which is really, really useful. So if you then go for veterans, you can spend an additional 15 points to get Clash 3 instead of Clash 2, which is very helpful, especially if you're using Elysian Fragment, which you absolutely should with every Theist Priest that you're ever going to be taking. The thing about Relentless Drill, though, is that instead of getting a few additional hits because of your +1 clash, you're going to be getting a few additional hits because of the additional support. So you can have the priest in the front plus a couple more militia, so you're going to have maybe 9 attacks from the front normally, and then you're going to have another, say, 6 attacks from the back from support 2. It'll be 9 attacks from support 3, and if the priest is putting Blessed on the unit anyway with Focused, etc., and they're getting rerolls, they may not necessarily need the +1 attack that badly, but the extra support is giving you a similar number of hits, but the difference is that Relentless Drill is free. And that is the main reason why I take it. It's free. You don't spend any more points on it. And effectively, if you're getting a little bit of a side grade by going from veterans to Relentless Drill, but you're saving points, that is the ultimate underlying reason why I pretty much always take it. Because what I want to do is I want to very carefully cherry pick the upgrades and units I'm spending my points on. And Relentless Drill allows me to do that, whereas veterans means I've got to spend even more and I've got to make cuts elsewhere in the army to fit things in. So that's why I typically typically only take veterans if I'm really being serious about getting the most damage out of the knights that I possibly can. Otherwise, it's always going to be Relentless Drill. So that's my commentary on the army. But the thing that I really like about these army upgrades is that there's a place for both of them. You know, I'm never going to always use one of those upgrades, but I'm never going to never use it either. There's always going to be some lists which have one or the other, and that's the same for most 100 Kingdoms players, and that's something which is making the faction really, really good right now. Cool, let's go through them. So let's jump now to the Chapter Mage. This is one of the spellcasters, the other one's the Theist Priest. So the Mage is the faction Wizard, and the Priest is the faction Priest. Makes sense, it's there in the title. Now, I'm disappointed to tell you guys that in terms of internal balance, this mage is currently quite poorly designed, even though they've tried to help it recently. On the plus side, she is still a viable character that you will put in some lists and not others, and that's perfectly where you need to be. You want your character to be the kind of character that makes it into some lists, not others. You don't want an auto-include character which always has to be there, and you don't want a character that stays on the shelf all the time, and that's the Chapter Mage. The reason why I say it's not very well balanced internally is that you always seem to take the same type of mage. So you go down to spells, there are all these schools here, and anything other than the School of Fire, is a bit gimmicky. The School of Water, I think, is very, very good because you can really print money if you're doing a lot of healing there, and what you can do here is you can make her the Warlord, and that allows you to have slightly longer range with protective glyphs, so 8-inch range, so you can stand her in front of a unit like Gilded Legion, Household Guard, Steel Legion, something like that, or even like Ashen Dawn, and actually heal them. And if you can get that working, that's very, very powerful. The drawback is, though, you wouldn't really want to take her as a Warlord because there are other characters in your army which need their supremacy ability. Even though 100 Kingdoms as a faction are allowed to select 2 Warlords, for those new players, if I haven't already covered that already, 2 Warlords is a specific faction thing for 100 Kingdoms, but even then, it's typically going to be like a Priority Commander and an Imperial Officer, or an Imperial Officer and a Noble Lord, or something like that, not so much a Chapter Mage. So it's just hard to get as much value out of School of Water, even though, if you were healing something every single turn, you'd get a lot of value in the long run. And Cool Fog just doesn't come up enough to be better than School of Fire. And then you go to School of Fire and it's like, oh, okay, you've got a very reliable and powerful fireball, which you can use every time you're in range, even if you're in combat. So that's why you take it. And occasionally Kindle Courage is going to be something you use, but it's extremely situational. It's almost always going to be fired up. Then we look at School of Earth, and these, again, are so situational. You quite often need to be drawing your Chapter Mage card before your opponent activates the enemy unit. If they know that they're going to know that you're using School of Earth, they can look it up on their app, and they've realized what your mage can do. And there's so many ways for them to play around this stuff. If you're trying to slow them down with Earth to Mud, they may well activate that unit before you get to your mage. With Stone Spikes, they may just realize that their cavalry unit's not going to be very effective, so they go and do something else. And your mage may only have one point in the game where they can viably use this, whereas if they had School of Fire, they can be using that in every other situation. School of Air is really disappointing to me because she can only really go in a unit of mercenary crossbowmen, and these guys aren't the most effective when there's just a unit of 3 of them, and there's multiple units of 3 of them, and they're running around the battlefield doing their shooting. And the investment you put into the mage to get School of Air really helping them is sometimes equivalent to what you're getting out of shooting the fire dart anyway, but there are going to be some turns where your crossbowmen aren't in range, or they're just going to be dying, or something like that. And it's just sort of hard to see, especially with scaling as well. I mean, you'd want to be casting the spell on a very large unit of crossbowmen, and you can't really afford to have the spell fail, so you want to buff her in other ways to get around scaling, but then of course she's going to cost more points, and it becomes kind of difficult. I kind of thought about School of Air in the previous patch when she was allowed to seek new escort to a new unit. You can't do that anymore, so you'd again have to choose her as the Warlord to get the additional range. Then you go spells, School of Air, and you can be buffing a big unit of Hunter Cadre or, Longbowmen or something like that. There's just so much you need to do, so many preliminary steps and resources you need to put in place when the alternative is just School of Fire, where she's just cheap as, you can possibly make her. And that gives you a useful armor-piercing 2 spell with a long range, which works very, very well. And then if you want to, you can put 15 points focused, which typically you should, unless you're needing that upgrade for the priest. Again, you can only have one upgrade of its kind in the army. And the other ability, which is very, very good for her, or the other item, is Kiss for Well. So this thing here, that gives her a bonus to shooting. And she's the one character in your army that starts at volley 3. That's why she makes very good use of this item. Having Deadly Shot is really nice. Having extra barrage is very nice. I think that she has some of those abilities even without the Kiss for Well. So look up here. Oh no, so barrage for range 18 naturally. And then once you add Kiss for Well, let me just find it real quick. So now she's barrage 7 volley 3 range 18 with Deadly Shot, which is really good. So if you can afford this, it's a very good item upgrade for her. In terms of all of the other heirlooms, I can't really think of anything else that's useful for her. Maybe Eye of Achilles if you're also going for that same strategy of buffing something like a unit of Longbowmen with the Warlord ability and School of Air. Chapter Scroll is specifically designed for her, but it's very unuseful, I should say. Although enemy interference is good, just, paying 20 points for that bonus is too much for 20 points, and you're using her magic item slot, which would be, it'd be better served taking like the focused ability or something else. Actually, sorry, focus is a mastery, so you're not doubling up there, but the point being that if you're going to be spending 20 points for something like that, surely you could upgrade to the Kiss for Well for a further 10 points, which would be a better expenditure. So my main problem with the Chapter Mage is that she's a little bit boring at the moment, but the thing I like about her is that she is useful. She's a good sort of gunboat, a little sort of better, a bit of a range increase, and she's able to take both men-at-arms and mercenary crossmen, which are both excellent. So she's got a good warband there, just a little bit boring. Okay, moving on. We're going to go to the Imperial Officer, who has been regarded as the best 100 Kingdoms character for a long period of time. He has been nerfed a bit recently, but still after the nerf, he's very, very good. So Supremacy ability, Rapid Employment, gives up to 2 friendly infantry regiments Vanguard. Vanguard is something which you appreciate more and more and more as you become better at this game. As a new player, you might not feel that an extra move when you're coming onto the table is useful for a regiment, because they're going to get there anyway. But as an experienced player, you're going to start to see that getting on top of objectives is extremely important. Outmaneuvering your opponent is very important. Increasing your reinforcement line is very important. And the ability to do that and to help outmaneuver your opponent is very, very good. Previously, he just permanently let all infantry units have Vanguard, which was too strong. We were seeing some builds where it'd be like 16 infantry units and they'd all have Vanguard. It was just a bit too much. So the way to build them now completely optimally is sometimes to actually have a mixture of cavalry and infantry, which can be very, very good anyway. It's got Forward Force, which gives you flank onto 1 unit, so that kind of encourages you to go with a heavy unit, because heavy units obviously are the slowest to come onto the field and need the most help there. So luckily he does have access to some extremely good heavy units, such as Steel Legion and Gilded Legion. So if he goes on one of those 2 units, and he's fine in either of those units, they'll get flank, which is great. Support 2, that's not something he has naturally, it's just because we've selected a Relentless Drill in the army list builder up here. Okay, so next up, he's got some specific abilities just for him. He's got 4 battlefield drills. You can choose up to 2 of them. And your choices here are really going to depend on the kind of unit he goes in. He's got 2 upgrades just for infantry, that are sort of combat infantry, and 2 of them for range units. So Brace for Impact gives you Bastion. This is not as effective if you're just putting him in a unit of Rangers or Hunter Cadre right at the back, but it is very effective for Steel Legion and Gilded Legion. Note that Gilded Legion have a champion upgrade which gives them Bastion anyway, so if you take Brace for Impact, you're kind of doubling up on that. And they can both take a Drill Master, that is Steel Legion and Gilded Legion. All of the Legions can take a Drill Master, which gives them the double time thing, which he can give them anyway. Note that if you are going to be putting him in a humble unit of men-at-arms, that's a different story. If he gets both of his battlefield drills there, you are giving them to a unit that otherwise wouldn't have them. Yes, the men-at-arms can take the Seasoned Veteran, which only gives them Bastion, but you can save yourself a full 20 points if the Imperial Officer isn't going in that unit. Note that you can do this at the list building stage and then decide later which unit you're going to put them into. But both of these generally are very good. And if we go and look at Steel Legion and we look at the officers, if you look at Gilded Legion, they can have a seasoned veteran or a drill master. So if you're going to go for the seasoned veteran, which gives Bastion, you could just save yourself the 20 points and not take that if you've got the Imperial Officer in there anyway, and take the drill master instead. And although double time does overlap with what the Imperial Officer can do, the +1 attacks can be potentially quite good if you're going to be laying yourself out in a bit of a spread. Now, Gilded Legion are more about support. We'll talk about them later. But let's imagine we're going to be putting them in a large unit of Steel Legion. They're going to have a Drill Master and a Standard Bearer, and we go to the Officer, and the Officer's plan is to lead the Steel Legion. Then you still want to select these 2 upgrades. They can't benefit from these shooting upgrades, so realistically, Brace for Impact is the only one that matters there, and On Your Feet is just sort of like a sake of completion kind of pick. It's not really going to do anything. So the Imperial Officer, very, very good. He can't seek New Escort anymore, and unfortunately, unlike the last patch, he's going to count as the same weight class as the unit that he's in. So if he joins a unit like Imperial Ranger Corps or Hunter Cadre, he's not going to be able to score while in them. I used to have a strategy where I'd actually put him with the Rangers, and they'd spin around and just use his double march from double time to get around and get into a zone very effectively. Having said that, if you go for 5 first, aim later, aim for the head, you can have a strategy here with a Ranger Corps or Hunter Cadre where you take a large unit of them. You could take the Heirloom Eye of Achilles, similar to what we're talking about with the Mage, and you can give him his own gun by selecting the Marksmanship upgrade here. And the cool thing about them is that they can reform, and they can reform a really long way for free with Fluid Formation. He can then activate what you'll do is you activate the Imperial Officer first, draw event Eye of Achilles onto the Rangers that he's part of, and then because he's in that unit, the new rules allow you to automatically draw that unit's card if it's the next in your stack. They activate, they've got reroll 6s, they can move and then shoot with reroll 6s, and then they can use 5 first, aim later to move again. Also, if you've moved within range, which might be easier thanks to the reformation, due to liquid formation, murderous volley, that means you can get them to take resolve checks if you are shooting within 12, which can be very, very strong. So it's quite a big investment, and my skepticism about the strategy, having tried it a couple of times, is that you need to have as much stuff in your army that can score as possible, but it still pumps out a lot of damage. Not great against Old Dominion because they don't take resolve checks at all. But if you do put them in the Hunter Cadre, they are again putting out a lot of damage, and especially if you go back to veterans, add veterans in there, get the Cadre up to volley 3, you've got Eye of Achilles, then you've got 5 first, aim later, you've got aim for the head. So the Imperial Officer can be used to support range units or combat units, which makes them really, really cool. There are some other masteries here which you can have a look at. I don't particularly love them. There are some, exotic ones here which cost a fair bit of points. Rally to me is interesting on your range unit, by the way, because it allows you to sort of get out of range combat. Like you could have Ranger Corps, which automatically pass the withdraw check to get away from combat, and they can shoot backwards thanks to liquid formation. So there are some interesting strategies there for you to try. Typically, at the moment, at the time of recording this video, I would be most inclined to put them in a combat unit, thanks to Forward Force, like Steel Legion, I might add, or Gilded Legion. The one heirloom that you sometimes see him with is this Armor of Dominion, which is a very strong item for 100 Kingdoms. And the key is that enemy stands in contact with him lose cleave and smite. So it's not something which affects your regiment. It's not something that affects their regiment. It affects the stands in contact with him. So if they come and attack your unit from the front and the officer has to be on the side of the unit, there might be 1 or 2 stands attacking your regiment that aren't in contact with the officer who don't lose the cleave and smite. But if you're up against a monster, for example, like imagine you're up against like a City-States Titan or a mountain like a ice Jotnar from Nords, and that Jotnar is in contact with the front of your unit and your Imperial Officer is touching it and it loses cleave 3, but it's up against your Steel Legion or your Gilded Legion who have Bastion thanks to the Imperial Officer. They are going to do negligible amounts of damage to your unit, and you're eventually going to cut them down without much losses. And for 40 points, that's really the benefit there. Sometimes you don't get full value out of this, for example, when you're just being shot at, or when your character dies to a duel, or when, they're an enemy unit that doesn't really use much cleave, or if they're using flawless strikes. So this is not the perfect magic item in the game. It's not really my favorite 100 Kingdoms item of all time, but it's very useful, and it's something you're definitely going to be wanting to consider if you're running the strategy of taking Brace for Impact and taking a large unit of infantry. And one strategy at the moment is known as triple block. That's where you effectively go for Gilded Legion and you take a ton of them. So you've got the Gilded Legion being led by the Imperial Officer, and let's say you've got a massive block of 7 of them, and you're taking Relentless Drill, and they're all support 3, they're going to be clash 3, they're going to inspire, and they're not going to take much damage because they're going to be effectively defense 4 with Bastion once you've activated that, and Armor of Dominion is going to stop them from using Cleave and Smite. So that can be quite powerful, and I mentioned triple block because elsewhere in your army you'll have the Noble Lord with allowing your infantry to reroll 6s, so you'll have his own unit of Household Guard, which is like 7 to 9 stands, plus the Fierce Priest with the Militia. So we'll talk about that a bit more soon, hopefully. Alright, I think I'll leave the Imperial Officer there. There's more to discover about him. I can't get to every single feature of every character in this video. I'm not going to go through every upgrade, but generally, that gives you an overview of the Imperial Officer. He's an extremely strong character, and if you're going to be playing 100 Kingdoms long term, you're definitely going to find yourself using him a lot. Next up, the Mounted Noble Lord, also a very useful character, and this is the character you're going to take if you want to use a lot of Household Knights, because he is obviously the boss version, the character version of the Knights. So importantly, Supremacy ability Speed of Horse is passive and gives every knight in your army a +1 impact and reroll 6s, which is very strong. If all you're taking in your list is 1 unit of 3 knights, it's not going to do a lot, is it? But if your list is going to have 5 knights in it, plus the Noble Lord, and you want this knight unit to do as much damage as absolutely possible, you build the list in the following way. So the Noble Lord is selected as the Warlord, giving you the Speed of Horse ability. Heirlooms, he's going to go straight for Oliphant's Roar, which is the one upgrade you can take to improve impact hits with Glorious Charge. The all +1 clash terrifying for impact hits in that unit, which is very strong. Weapon Arts, I personally like the new one, Duelist, because that gives him +1 clash, which will affect his impact hits. The rest of these won't affect his impact hits. They're all very good, and Weapon Master is generally the one to take if you're doing a lot of clash actions, but Duelist is my go-to for impact hits. And then under Masteries, if you want to, you can take Tip of Lance. I don't think you necessarily need it all the time, but Wedge allows you to have +1 cleave when you do a clash as well. Because the Knights themselves are going to have this Tawny Champion, which gives them the extra threat range of 2 inches, they can charge 7 + 2 for the Tawny Champion, that's 9, plus D6, so at least +1. And if you want to march first then charge, you're going to have a range of like 9 + 7 + D6. So 16, 17 plus. So that's generally what you want to be doing with your impact hits, but if you get them to within 10 inches, you might be able to charge a then clash, in which case you can do a bit of damage with the cleave. And without cleave, there are going to be some units which are so tough, the knights aren't really going to break through them. But this setup here, it's very expensive. Once we've factored in the Standard Bearer, that's going to double the cost of the Tawny Champion. We take Clash here. So we've spent 310 plus 180 there. That's a lot of points. So you're talking about 490 points for that unit there, that regiment with the Noble Lord and the Knights. And absolutely devastating block of guys, but that is a quarter of your army. So you've got to be very careful about building your list in that way, because after you've charged and just completely wiped out their unit, if they've got a unit left to activate and they charge you and they tie you up in combat and other units come in to help them out, you'll probably lose the game overall because you've spent too much getting in there. But if you've got a way of singling out enemy units, or if you just crush an enemy unit that's very expensive and they fight their way out of there, it can work. Right, so the Noble Lord can be built that way. The other option you can go is just to get rid of Tip of the Lance, drop the Knights down so they don't have the Tawny Champion, and take them down to, say, 4 guys, and don't even worry about veterans. You can even just drop that back to Relentless Drill. and then you can just take lots of knights. So let's say you have another unit of knights there, and then you take another noble lord, or let's say for example we don't even have the noble lord there, we have the foot-mounted one, and he takes, you know, some household guard and some mercenary crossbowmen and a couple more unit of knights. You can see how it's possible to put a lot of small units of knights into your army list. And that is the other way to build this army and get the most out of his speed of horse ability, because it's saying all household knight regiments on the battlefield. So all of these guys get +1 impact hit and reroll 6s, which starts to become more and more value just by putting in lots of small units of knights in your list. They are only 140 points per regiment. And that is the beauty of the knights, is that you can, if you want to, spend that 500 points or 490 on the block with a lord that will crush anything that it touches, or you can have a lot of them spread out where the individual unit of knights just doesn't do very much damage, but it's good at taking damage because they're armor 4 from the front with shield. They can just hang on an objective, which is useful. They can rush very quickly to the other side of the battlefield and pick up another objective. They can beat up small enemy regiments, like if you're just going after a unit of marksman clones from spires or something like that. Getting there and then getting into combat without getting too many like casualties from being shot becomes a possibility at the lowest price possible, and the noble lord certainly helps that with his supremacy ability. So that's the other way to go with household knights. And yet you can even go for some sort of middle ground where you give them 1 or 2 of the possible upgrades, bearing in mind that you can have veterans in there, you can have the noble lord's supremacy ability, you can have the tawny champion, you can have Oliphant's Roar, you can have those things, and you don't have to take all of them. You can take some of, but not all of them, going for a middle ground build, and that gives you a lot of control over your list building and to get what you want out of it. So the Mounted Noble Lord is a very popular character in 100 Kingdoms. He can take a lot of the other basic troops here, as you can see, and we'll start to talk about those basic troops as we get further into this video, but Mounted Noble Lord, very, very good. The foot noble lord on foot, has been less preferred over the years, but he's starting to get better and better and better. Note that the mounted version has the mounted squires in restricted, whereas if you take the noble lord on the horse, he can take mounted and squires as mainstay. So that is a very big difference. But the guy on foot, typically his favorite unit is the household guard. They are a unit that's specifically designed for him. So if you go down to the officers for Household Guard and select Arms Master, it says they can reroll 6s, but while a Noble Lord is with them, they get +1 clash instead, which is important, because it takes them up to clash 3, and then if you're using his Supremacy ability, you can reroll 6s anyway, rather than stacking it with the Arms Master upgrade. So the range of this has been buffed recently. He projects a little bubble around him of 8 inches where every infantry unit can reroll 6s on attacks and defense all the time, which is good if you get a lot of mileage out of it. What was often happening earlier on is that the Noble Lord would either just die because the Household Guard weren't tough enough, or the game would be so spread out that he wouldn't have enough nearby regiments in range for him to benefit from it. They've slowly been buffing him by making that ability a longer range. They've also changed his weapon arts here, where they've given him an extra one. So you can have this one, the Graceful Combatant, for example, which gives him straight up +2 attack, which is very good, especially when combined with something like Weapon Master, which is the classic one which everybody took for Cleave. Relentless, gaining Flurry, I don't think that's as useful because he's going to be able to reroll 6s anyway with his faction ability, I believe, or by taking the Mastery Eccentric Fighting Style, which gives him another 2 attacks and rerolled hits. He has to reroll his own defense falls, but still. So, as you can see on this profile, he's got 8 attacks here with that setup, so this is something which I quite like. He becomes a real blender that way with Cleave 1, 8 attacks, and effectively rerolling 6s, because the way I read it, he is in his own friendly regiment, and that regiment gets to do rerolls, so that will count for him, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. And so he has to be the Warlord for that, I was just going to say. In terms of items, the classic one here is a Regalia of the Empire, which effectively means that Only the Household Guard regiment can take it. So yet there's yet another thing which is sort of forcing you to sort of put the Noble Lord with the Guard. It's just a match made in heaven, and that's sort of like I think they've designed it a little bit too stringently, really, where you would never take the Noble Lord with anything else but the Household Guard. I would prefer there to be more options that are viable, but really this is the main way to do it. So Dauntless means that you're never broken and you're always inspired. This used to be a very good upgrade for them. One thing that has sort of weakened this a little bit is that the rules for duels has changed. So when you decline a character duel, you don't become broken. You suffer some other penalties. So Dauntless was previously a way of getting around that, allowing you to have a Noble Lord in your unit, which is an absolute blender. You take eccentric fighting style, and the negative effect of it, where you re-roll your own hit rolls and defense rolls for the Noble Lord personally, that would normally be a liability when another character is specifically rolling to hit against your Noble Lord. But now you can't dodge the duel. So what would previously happen, the enemy character attempts to challenge you, you decline, your unit would normally become broken as a result. You can't be broken because of Regalia the Empire banner, which gives you Dauntless, and then he gets away with +2 attacks and rerolled his own attack rolls without suffering the negative penalty. But now, because your unit can suffer negative effects, and if you decline the duel, it doesn't become broken, so Dauntless isn't really giving you a much benefit from never being broken. It's not as good of as an upgrade anymore. You can still take it. There's still an argument for it. The item that I prefer personally is this one, the Flesh Cleaver, because unlike Caliburn, which is giving you rerolls, which you're already getting, the Flesh Cleaver gives you Deadly Blades, which means that any failed defense roll of a 6 means that they suffer 2 wounds instead of 1. It gives you Fiend Hunter as well, which you just really do not need because you're getting rerolls anyway. So that's just sort of like a wasted thing. But 15 points for Deadly Blades is pretty significant when you're attacking like 8 times per action. So yeah, that's probably my go-to, or anything else that would sort of help them for a duel, like a Mask of Euclides or Lady's Favor, if you're going to be accepting those duels, and you're going to have to re-roll your own armor saves. If you're wanting to survive, that could be a good way to go. Or you could just give them no heirlooms at all. That's how I'd look at it. Anyway, Household Guard, you want to take at least 5. I think if the Noble Lord's going to be in them, some people take closer to 7 to 9. I prefer 5 or 6. And these guys can be a really good blending unit, but just mind you that the Noble Lord doesn't increase their resolve. They stay at resolve 3. They have 4 wounds apiece, and the defense 3 without any bastion or anything. So the problem with them is that they can suffer quite a lot against like brutal impact and armor-piercing shooting. Anything that's got a lot of cleave. They have a bit of trouble punching up, so to speak. But against a lot of opponents, they do very well because of the reroll 6s and because of the Noble Lord leading them. Elsewhere, he's got access to the general lineup here, and Longbowman is the one rare unit, the one restricted unit that only the Noble Lord can have. And you can't take Longbowman in the mounted Noble Lord version, I believe. No, oh yeah, you can. Sorry, excuse me. So either the on foot or mounted guy can have the Longbowman. These guys used to be one of the better units in the game. They got nerfed years ago, and they've never fully recovered, but Para Bellum has slowly been making them better and better. I would still take these guys in a list which includes a lot of regiments. Like if you're taking a massive stack of like 16 cards, you've got 12 different regiments there, and you're forming a big long line in the front, and the Longbowmen are unlikely to get attacked. Having 1 or 2 units at the back to shoot every single turn, so long as you've got other medium units to do the scoring, the Longbowmen can be worth it. Yes, you could have a build where the Noble Lord takes Eye of Callus and deploys in them. I just don't think it's the right way to use the Noble Lord. The Longbowmen can be very useful, again, if they survive long enough to get the advantage of their range. And they can be quite a clutch unit in situations where you've left the enemy regiment on like 1 wound left, and you're going to have to activate your combat unit an entire new round to clear them out and move on to a zone or something like that. If the Longbowmen shoot into combat and like clutch it and kill that regiment, you freeze up your regiment to go off and do some attacking. So that's the way to play them. You can, obviously build them into a big unit. They have cleave for some reason, which they're never going to use. I like 1 to 2 units of 3 in a big list, and that's where I would typically put them. So that's what I want to say about the Noble Lord. Generally, that build I just discussed is my sort of way of playing them. You can explore some of the other items in armor, but I don't think there's really much use for anything else like that. I mean, everything else that looks useful is just you can find something else which is a better way of spending your points, typically, in my opinion. So that's the Noble Lord on foot. Moving on to the Priory Commanders, there's 3 versions of them. So they are all very similar in the sense they have the same supremacy ability which gives their warband blessed for 1 round. So they all have that in common. The Priory Commander for Crimson Tower and Steel Sealed Temple have slightly different stats, so we'll talk about in a second. But the main difference is the type of regiment that they can have as a mainstay. The Priory Commander Crimson Tower can only have Crimson Towers as the mainstay. The Priory Commander of Sealed Temple can only have Sealed Temple as the mainstay. And the Priory Commander of Sword can only have the Order of the Sword as the mainstay. But they can all have access to the rest of these units as restricted units, including Order of the Ashen Dawn. So generally, the thinking is that because Order of the Ashen Dawn is the strongest unit in the game, the strategy usually is just to take the Priory Commander plus a couple of mainstays and then 2 Ashen Dawn, or like 1 per mainstay that you could possibly have. Let's focus on this guy first. These guys came out quite a long time ago. Up until the latest patch, the consensus was that these guys were too weak. I did mention in my video, I think it was last December, that they could do with +1 wound. Para Bellum may well have seen that because that's exactly what they did. They upgraded them to buff them to wounds 5 instead of 4. I have been place testing them a bit. The general consensus is that they are still just a little bit too weak. The thing is, though, that they allow you to take Ashen Dawn, and that's the main thing. So that would be fine if it wasn't for the fact that the other Priory Commander can have a unit which is 10 points less expensive, arguably better than Order of the Crimson Tower because of their Fluid Formation ability, and then you can go to the lovely Ashen Dawn over here. So that is why the Order of the Crimson Tower are seen less. I still kind of like them, and let's just talk about what's going on here. So unlike the Sealed Temple, the Priory Commander has the same Impact 4, Brutal Impact 2, Terrifying 1 as his unit. So that is what allows him to blend in with them. Whereas if you have the Sealed Temple, he's got Quicksilver Strike instead, which makes him great at just marching right into combat with an enemy character, hopefully like a spellcaster, and then dueling them. And if they decline, their unit takes a penalty. If they accept, he might even be able to kill them before they can strike back. So that's the difference between the 2 commanders. You typically want to use his Warlord ability, especially if you are filling out the warband. Like, if you're having this sort of setup, you must have him as the Warlord, because having Blessed on all these units is just too crucial. Order of the Ashen Dawn already have Blessed, but the Supremacy ability will allow you to gain +1 attack or Hardened on them, which is very useful. So that's why you would definitely want your Priory Commander as the Warlord. If you're just running this sort of setup with 1 of each, you could get away with having 2 other Warlords and not the Priory Commander if you really need it. Like if you just really want your Imperial Officer and your Mage and your Noble Lord to be the other 2 Warlords, you can get away with it. But I think that this Order of the Crimson Tower unit does need Blessed, because sometimes they're going to want to have that one single charge where they're throwing like 16 dice from the Impact 4s on these 3 plus the Commander, and they want to make the most use of Brutal Impact 2 and Terrifying as possible, so they use Blessed on that. Or more commonly, they make that march charge into close combat and they know that they're going to get counterattack next turn or later on in that same turn, and having Blessed to reroll the armor saves is really, really key. So I think that that's quite a crucial thing for the Priory Commander to be the Warlord if possible. So in terms of masteries, you'll notice that the Priory Commander on horse has no access to heirlooms at all, but there is a trick if you're new and you don't know this. You want to select Long Lineage, which is 15 points and gives him no advantages whatsoever except for the fact that it unlocks the ability to take 1 heirloom, which allows you to then pick all of these items here. The only one that you'd realistically consider is this, Eye of Achilles. Oliphant's Roar. I always get them mixed up. They're the same points. So, Oliphant's Roar, Eye of Achilles. So Glorious Charge makes these guys absolutely overkill. Instead of hitting on Clash 3, they go up to Clash 4, and they don't really need the Terrifying buff, so it's a bit of a waste. But the thing is, if you're taking a big unit of 5 of them, then putting Oliphant's Roar on them means that this unit will just absolutely stomp anything it touches. It's got a threat range of 7 for marching, 7 for charging, 1 for d6, so at least 15 inches plus. And I can't think of that many things in the game that would withstand that. Maybe stuff that has pike formation that reduces impact hits, but the powerhouse here is that you're going to be hitting 2/3 of your attacks, and you're going to be having that's 24 impact hits, and they're all brutal impact too. So that's where you go into overdrive. It's just that this sort of setup is just a little bit too expensive. Because you've got to spend a lot on the priority commander, and once the knights get mired in close combat with infantry units, that's when you start losing games. The other way you can go here is just to put in this eccentric fighting style, which is new. That's the other thing I kind of like on him, where he goes up to 8 attacks because he starts with 6, and he's already Clash 4, and he's already Terrifying 1, and he can benefit from Blessed as well. Not that he needs it with this thing in there, but this makes the unit very good at marching, charging, and then dueling with the priority commander against an enemy unit that's maybe already on a zone, and you want to sort of make them less effective there. So that can be a really good upgrade to have on him. But most of the time when I'm building this sort of warband, I don't have any upgrades on him at all. I typically would have the standard barrier on the Crimson Tower because they're so reliant on charging. They need to make the charge. Order of the Ashen Dawn, I must say, they don't necessarily need the standard bearer. If you're having a slightly larger unit than normal, then yes, take the standard bearer. But this is a unit that doesn't mind being charged. They're a brawler unit. They want to spend a lot of time locked in combat, and you don't necessarily need the extra charge reliability except in really clutch situations. So if you can find something else in your army you really need those 15 points for, do it. But if you do have the spare 15 points, then it's not going to hurt them to have it. I do remember losing a game due to not having that, but I think that was down to other problems in the game more so than just that one situation. So that's the priority commander with Crimson Tower. If you come over to the Sealed Temple version, obviously the Sealed Temple do not have brutal impact. They do not have terrifying. What they do have is fluid formation, which is huge, and they are movement 8. So the really nutty thing about this very, very mobile unit is that you can line them up, and then when it's time to activate them, you can kind of swivel them around a bit thanks to the the fluid formation, which brings the corner of your unit a little bit closer to the enemy, and then when you measure the distance between them and the enemy, it's a bit shorter, makes it easy for you to get into combat. And it's very hard to escape these guys. Also, if they're on one side of the battlefield and your opponent is overcommitted to blocking them and killing them, maybe they have a unit of phalangites or something which is very good against charges, you can spin them around for free and march 16 inches to the other side of the battlefield, maybe 17 inches with a banner. So they are so slippery and powerful. And at 190 points, being a little bit less than the Crimson Tower at their 200 points means that they allow you to get to Order of the Ashen Dawn, which is the end game goal, by saving 10 points. Realistically, I think these guys probably deserve to be slightly more expensive, or the Crimson Tower deserve to be slightly less expensive, but these guys are the new hotness. The Para Commander has impact 5 instead of 4, and again with Quicksilver Strike, you can use their movement speed and ability to march and then charge. You do your impact hits, and then your guy can challenge their character very effectively. So if you were going to be using eccentric fighting style on a Priority Commander, I feel like it's even more likely to be this Priority Commander than this Priority Commander, just because these guys find it a little bit easier to get around the battlefield and pick their target more effectively. Order of the Sealed Temple are slightly weaker in combat than the Crimson Tower because they have fewer wounds and fewer attacks, so there is that difference. But generally, this unit is there for mobility and just sweeping through stuff that's going to be killing anyway. So a unit of archers or a spellcaster's little, line infantry bunker, Order of the Sealed Temple can find them and kill them more quickly. Order of the Crimson Tower is just a bit clunkier and slower, and that's why people typically prefer this warband. I love the miniatures for Order of the Crimson Tower. I do hope they continue to receive buffs. I think that Para Bellum within the next couple of patches will probably get it right, and the Order of the Sealed Temple probably will eventually come in line with Order of the Crimson Tower eventually. So that would be cool. I will say a little bit about the foot guy who hasn't come out yet because I've been proxying him a lot. I feel like he has actually been weakened by the fact that he can't take retinues and control his loadout a little bit more. He can only take Order of the Sword, which is another unreleased unit as a mainstay, but then you can, of course, get access to Ashen Dawn. Theoretically, he's actually the cheapest way of getting the Ashen Dawn because you can just take 2 minion units of Order of the Sword. I just don't feel like the minimum units are very, very good because they still die quite easily and they're still quite expensive for what they cost. So my preferred loadout is to take 5 of them and to give this guy some kind of defensive bonus. So going up to heirlooms, if you take something like Standard of Steel or Armor of Dominion, it helps there. Armor of Dominion maybe not as crucial for the Prior Commander because Order of the Sword have Evasion 2, so if they have Smite or if they have Cleave 2 or better, then Armor of Dominion doesn't really, it's not really helping you as much as it normally would because you can just fall back on the Evasion anyway, if that makes sense. He's quite an expensive character. Or he can become an expensive character, I probably should say, to be fair. Previously, what you could do is you could give him upgrades for more of the combat stuff. I believe some of that's already been factored into his profile, so that's nice, but I think you can get him up to Cleave 2 previously. You can build him with stuff like Caliburn or obviously the Strategic Fighting Style, etc., Disorienting Strikes, Overkill. These are all kind of useful for him. Frontline Tactician, probably not the best. I think that's really best for heavy infantry, to be honest. These other upgrades, again, they're there, but the way to build this guy either is just to give him nothing at all, or to give him something that helps your very, very expensive unit survive. Standard of Steel is a really good one. At 40 points, that's just going to mean that your unit's just going to take fewer hits. It gives you more chances to activate and use your really good stats here. Order of the Sword have counterattack, which is a really gimmicky ability. It just... reflecting a hit on a roll of a 1 actually means that in practice, as opposed to on paper, you're not really inflicting that many hits. It's kind of cool that he has the First Blessing, so they can re-roll their saves. So if you're saving on 2s with Evasion 2, for example, against Cleave, you're blocking 1/3 of those hits, and then you're taking 2/3 of them and re-rolling them, and that may generate even more saves on a 1, generating more counterattacks. That is kind of cool because the more rerolls you're making, the more further ones you're going to be getting. Like if you're just rerolling 6s only, that's fewer dice that you can convert into 1s. So in theory, there's a potential to roll a lot of counterattack hits and put some damage reflected back on your opponent. But it's still a pretty gimmicky ability, and honestly, if this unit could be attacks 5 instead of counterattack, I would much prefer it. That would be like way better. But all round, having Clash 4, Wounds 5, Resolve 4, Evasion 2, very good stats. And the reason why this unit has promise is that you can use Relentless Drill, which is a free army-wide ability, and yet again, another reason why I like Relentless Drill. It's like you don't have to spend any points there, and this unit, which has Clash 4, Cleave 1, has more supporting attacks, which is great. You also have the ability to stack these guys with the Imperial Officers Supremacy, where you get Vanguard. They can march like 15 inches onto the table, +1 for the Standard Bearer. They can also stack with the Noble Lord on foot, who rerolls, who gives 6s of rerolls to everything nearby, which means that you've got your Blessed Supremacy turn, but on every other turn, these guys can still roll 6s. On the Evasion 2, they can turn some of those 6s into 1s for counterattacks. So there is some synergy in the rest of your army for this unit. Counterattack, again, gimmicky, but it's what it is. It's there. I prefer parry, but that's okay. So that's the Prior Commander Order of the Sword. Again, he is a fighter, but just don't overdo it in the points unless you're really feeling like you're getting the value. And then, of course, you're always taking Order of the Ashen Dawn. So that's a brief look at the commanders. Lastly, we'll look at the Priest. So the Priest... Sakai are unreleased. We'll say a bit about them later, but the Militia is really the unit that the Priest wants to be in. He doesn't really want to hang around in a unit of Militia Bowmen. They'll die too easily and you'll lose them. He costs 100 points base. So the really go-to build here is the Militia plus Standard Bearer, because it's only 5 points and you do want to charge. and the Servite is my pick. The Neophyte gives them Devout and Priest Interference, but the thing is, by having a Priest in there anyway, he's giving them those rules for free. So you'd only ever take this upgrade if you were having like a secondary militia unit for some reason, which wanted to have those benefits. And we can talk about why you do that later. Errant of the Order of the Sword just makes your unit a little bit fightier, but typically you're not going to be doing a lot of duels and things with your priest at this stage. I'll talk about why you might want to do that later, but the Servite gives them more threat range and allows them to survive a little bit more easily with +1 resolve. So that is the go-to pick, I believe. So with the priest, you always take this item down here, the Elysian Fragment. You could take Hopes and Prayers, which is a specific one for him. It allows him to survive instead of dying, for example, if he was going to be killed by a duel. Because you can simply decline duels, and this costs 20 points, and you could be taking the Elysian Fragment anyway, you'd never, ever take Hopes and Prayers. This needs to be redesigned. The way that I think this ability should work in order for players to consider taking it, it'd be really cool if it allowed your regiment to survive with 1 wound remaining, where let's say you have 4 stands of militia plus the priest, and an enemy unit comes in like Thunder Riders and just obliterates them. Having Hopes and Prayers allows you to keep the priest there with the command stand, and the command stand and the priest are both reduced to 1 wound, and then your opponent has to spend additional actions removing them, giving you one last turn to block them and get out of the way. That would make building 100 Kingdoms lists interesting in the sense you could build around that and have a strategy for that, and it could be worthwhile. I personally would still take Elysian Fragment even if they buffed Hopes and Prayers to that level, but I think they should buff it like that to make it more interesting for people to make novelty lists, but at the moment Hopes and Prayers just not even a consideration. Masteries, you could take Focused, which is the one I always take because, number one, you've got this offensive spell, Holy Fire or whatever it's called, which does 2 hits to them for every success you get. So if you can reroll 2 fails, that is going to be very potent for just 15 points on a clutch turn where you want to get as much damage as possible. The other one that sometimes people take is Glimmer of the Faith, which is really cool. It allows you to target friendly regiments with Devout regardless of where they are. So there is a combo that you can pull here where you take, say, for example, an Imperial Officer or a Priority Commander on foot, and then you take your unit of Steel Legion, or you take your unit of Order of the Sword, for example, and you go and you take the Heirloom Mantle of St. Nicholas for 10 points, which makes your unit Devout. And the Steel Legion are this massive killer brick of 6 guys with a Drill Master and a Standard Bearer, and the officer is just buffing them up with obviously the normal stuff there. And the idea is that the priest with Glimmer of Faith can target a friendly unit with Devout. So even though these Steel Legion might be like 40 inches on the other side of the table about to charge something really strong, you can use the Theist Priest's ability to cast a spell like Heavenly Blessing, giving them Blessed, and then suddenly your Steel Legion are re-rolling all their armor saves or all of their attack rolls, which is very mighty indeed. Very few things are going to survive that. Prior Command Order of the Sword already has Blessing for 1 turn, but that would mean that on other turns as well, you might get the benefit of the priest casting Blessed on them. But he doesn't just have to cast that. He could cast something like this, which gives them +1 defense. So suddenly you're Steel Legion to defense 4, or maybe defense 5 with Bastion, which is crazy. They're incredibly tough in that case. And the officer might have, for example, Long Lineage with Armor of Dominion in there as well, if you want to just overspend on them. So that's the kind of combo you can get with Glimmer of Faith. And I don't really go for it that much because it's 30 points plus the other 10 points from the other character's item, and then the other character has to use their entire magic item slot for that. So I prefer the humble old Focus, and I like to keep the priest on his own without making that whole system work. But I just want to sort of tell you guys about this because you may be interested in making that kind of build yourself one day. But the thing about the priest, and the thing that makes him really strong, is the fact that you can activate him as your first card of your stack. And when you activate him, you use Elysian Fragment, which gives your entire unit of militia Smite, which is insane. Every hit they do will just ignore armor completely, so unless they have evasion, those hits will go directly through. And then after you've buffed your unit in that way, you then cast a spell, Heavily Blessing, on your unit to give them Blessed to generate more hits. If your unit has a large number of guys in there, scaling might mean that you fail the roll, but you've got focus, so you can reroll 2 fails. And devout allows you to put devout on your unit, which means that one of those fails gets turned into a success. So with focused in there as well, it becomes incredibly likely Blessed will work. If the priest is in a regiment and the regiment is the next card in your stack, which it will be, you then activate the militia. They are speed 6 thanks to the Servite, so if the enemy is 7 inches away, you can roll at least 1 on a dice and you will make it into contact. Your militia in this setup might be, for example, 2 wide, so you've got the command stand and the other stand in the middle. That's 9 attacks. With Relentless Drill, you've got another 3 in the back for another 9 attacks. That is 18 attacks. With Clash 2 going up to Clash 3 from Inspired, you'll hit half of them, so that is 9 hits. And if you're Blessed, you'll get another 4.5 hits. So they're taking 13.5 hits right there. And then the Priest is going to give you approximately another 3 hits. So they're going to be taking 16 to 17 hits, which ignore armor completely because of Smite. So just about any monster in the game is going to be deleted because you're then going to take resolve checks. If they have a big tough unit of like Praetorian Guards with Bastion and they're defense 5 or something, they're still going to lose 4 or 5 stands, and if that's all they had, their character will die as well. So you can see the power of this. You've spent a fair bit of points to get there. That is 310 points, but it can easily destroy a 500 point unit if your opponent lets it. And it basically can it creates this zoning threat where your opponent is just too afraid to bring anything near your militia. You can take a larger block of like 7. Some people really like doing that. This priest obviously benefits from the Vanguard ability from your Imperial Officer. It can benefit from a Noble Lord being nearby with Best of Men for rerolling 6s. That can be nice. You can take Veterans instead of Relentless Drill if you want to. That is not too expensive. So the priest is extremely strong in that regard. Even when you're not doing that, you can march 12 inches, double the speed of the militia, and then cast Holy Fire. He's priest 6, so 2 hits per success, so half of those are going to hit, and then you might get a couple of rerolls with focused. If the enemy unit has the devout ability, you get to turn 1 failed roll into a success, even when casting it on an enemy devout unit, which is crazy. So when the hits are doubled, you could potentially do up to 12 hits from a spell, which then will cause resolve checks unless there are Old Dominion. So he's a very useful spellcaster in that regard. Holy Fire being very strong, Saint's Favor being very useful if they already have Blessed or have Evasion, for example. You could have that going on to a unit of Order of the Sword, and they go up to Evasion 3 on the turn that they already have Blessed from the Prior Commander. Very, very useful. Fervor is something you're very, very rarely going to use. You can immediately remove Broken, which allows you to then inspire your unit and then clash, but very rare that you do that. Divine Sanction allows your character to get a free duel and have Quicksilver Strike, so he can actually beat up on other combat characters. You wouldn't typically use this because it's so easy for enemy units to decline duels. So that's not really a spell I'd use very much. But what I want to touch on here is the possibility of making him a warlord. This is, at the moment, this is a gimmicky ability that people don't really use, but they may buff it eventually. So it allows you to cast a spell onto the unit the priest is in, and then the unit will receive the effects as normal, but every other unit on the tabletop that has Devout will also receive that as well. So that's where, for example, let's say you have a secondary unit of militia, and they're a big old unit, and they're not led by a priest. You could take the Neophyte, and that gives them Devout. You can also take this other unit, Sakai, which aren't released yet. They have Devout automatically. You could take, for example, an Imperial Officer with a couple of units of Men-at-Arms. Men-at-Arms have this officer called Neophyte as well, which in the same way that the militia can get Devout, they get Devout too. The Imperial Officer can then take Heirlooms, go down to Mantle of St. Nicholas. He could then take a massive unit of Steel Legion, buff them up. Obviously, they've got the Drill Master for an extra attack, double time. You've got the Standard Bearer, and then he goes over and he takes the Mantle of St. Nicholas, what we've got. Then we take another Theist Priest. and we put him in a unit of bowmen, and we take another Theist Priest, and we put him in a unit of bowmen. What can happen there is that your two auxiliary units, priest units, can cast spells onto this main Theist Priest. So you got your primary Warlord Theist Priest out in the front, with another two Theist Priests behind his unit. You cast the Supremacy ability, and he then goes straight for Heavenly Blessing. Every unit in this particular army would get blessed for the rest of the turn. And then your second priest then casts this one, which gives every unit in your army +1 defense. And then you could cast something like Divine Sanction from the main priest, for example, and it gives you the ability to do this. Should the character cast Divine Sanction all friendly regiments with a Devout special rule benefit from if its effect, but do not perform a dual action. So when it says benefit from its effects, the regiment gains Cleaved 1, Deadly Blades, and Quicksilver Strike. So Quicksilver Strike's not going to work, but Cleave 1 and Deadly Blades certainly is. So you can see how your army becomes an absolute unstoppable god at that point. The problem, of course, just like every strategy game, is the tempo and the setup and the resources that it takes. For the rest of the game, when you are not doing that, you're taking an army that is very poorly built and very inefficient. And these priest units with militia bowmen are not cheap. 175 points just for buffing on one particular turn just doesn't make it worth it. So it's a meme list, it is gimmicky, but it's cool. And I hope that Para Bellum continue working on this and continue making this Spirit Shines upgrade more and more viable. Personally, I'd rework it a little bit. And I don't want to go into detail about what I would propose to do, but I just want to point out that it needs some work. So if you just happen to be wondering about the priest supremacy ability, yes, it is there, and yes, it is a thing. It's just that, you know, it doesn't get used, and that's why you typically don't see like neophytes running around in most competitive army lists. So that's the general idea of the priest. This particular setup you're seeing on your screen right now, where he is not a warlord, but he's got Legion Fragment focused, and the militia has a Servite Standard Bearer, and there's like 5 to 7 of them. That's the setup that you would normally take. Cool, so we've now gone through the entire faction, and we've broadly talked about the regiments that can be taken. I just want to spend a bit more time talking about some of the specific regiments that we haven't really drilled down on as much. Let's go through them. Men-at-Arms, these are typically a regiment you take with just 3 of them. You typically wouldn't take a Standard Bearer or an officer. If you're going to take more than 3, like you're going to bump it up to a block of 5 to 6, that's when you take the Seasoned Veteran to give Bastion. Otherwise, you take it as a multiple small unit. Men-at-Arms, extremely bland. They have a shield, and that's their only special rule, really. So they are probably the most boring unit in the game, but the interesting thing about them is that they are the most cost-effective way of just parking and camping on an objective zone in the game, period. There is no unit that is both cheaper than Men-at-Arms and also a scoring unit, period. And that's what makes them very, very viable and useful and well-designed right now for 100 Kingdoms. And it gives 100 Kingdoms a special flavor where we are the faction that can do that cheap scoring thing most effectively. And the other thing about Men-at-Arms is that they just have that basic level of toughness with Defense 2 and Shield, so it's kind of hard to delete them with a spell or just shooting if all they're doing for the entire game is camping on a zone. They also make good screening units where they go in front of an enemy, of a friendly unit. If they charge you with a 200 block unit of knights and you lose your Men-at-Arms, you've traded with them, you can then charge them with something else, and that works extremely, extremely well. So if you are collecting 100 Kingdoms, getting 2 boxes of these guys is a really good idea, especially in the current climate. Strongly recommend it. You're more than welcome to experiment with builds of like a block of 6. I did that for a while, but all of my current lists pretty much have the 2 units of 3 there. The Mercenary Crossbowmen cost exactly the same number of points, and they're probably almost almost as useful and viable, really, which makes this an interesting choice. You see a lot of units, a lot of lists, I should say, which have both the small units of Men-at-Arms and the Mercenary Crossbowmen in them. They can't score, and scoring's very important in the current climate. but because you can afford so many other scoring units, you can still afford to take them. This is probably the most cost-effective shooting unit in the game at the moment, and unfortunately, the internal balance isn't great because the other shooting units in your army, and you have a lot of other ranged infantry unit options. For example, Imperial Ranger Corps, Longbowmen, Hunter Cadre, Militia Bowmen, all of those are less cost-effective than this unit, and that's why the more advanced you get with the 100 Kingdoms, and the more experience you get, the more you seem to be using these in your lists. Straight up volley 2, very average. Range 18, that's a really good range. Barrage 3 is normal. Armor piercing 1 is a little bit rare with a lot of shooting units. They're absolutely terrible at fighting or doing anything else, but you don't want them to do anything else. You want them to be as cheap as absolutely possible. So your opponent, if they just ignore the crossbowmen and they don't focus on them at all during the game, and you happen to get like 8 rounds of shooting turn after turn after turn, these guys will more than make up their points. They'll be so effective. They can chip away at extremely valuable units like Ashen Dawn or something like that. Things that can't really afford to lose stands, but will lose stands against these guys' prolonged shooting. If they do charge you and focus on you, this unit is typically going to be screening more important stuff behind. So if they attack your mercenary crossbowmen with their cataphractoi and then you charge them with a unit of Steel Legion, the cataphractoi are worth 2 to 3 times as much as the crossbowmen were going to be worth, and they've just made a terrible, terrible trade there. So mercenary crossbowmen are extremely popular with the 100 Kingdoms, and in my opinion, slightly undercosted. I think the men-at-arms are fine, but if I was going to make any change, and I know that 100 Kingdoms players are going to hate me saying this, I think that they should be worth 110 points, if purely just to make them on par with other shooting units in this faction. Speaking of which, if we go to the Imperial Officer, I won't talk too much about the Imperial Ranger Corps, but just briefly, by comparison, for an extra 15 points, you're getting these guys, which better movement, better volley. They have fluid formation, which is amazing. They can actually they can turn around, shoot, and then move away from you. They can shoot in any direction they want. They can swivel around and then move and then shoot, and they can get the buffs from the Imperial Officer. But the thing is, you have range going down from 18 to 16, and you're losing armor piercing, and you're paying an additional 15 points. So it's almost like, in terms of the damage output in the rules, you're getting a little bit of a side grade, which you're paying an extra 15 points for, which is why mercenary crossbowmen are just much more popular and more effective at a high level of play than the Imperial Ranger Corps. So what I would do is, if I were Para Bellum, I would just increase the mercenary crossbowmen by 5 points and reduce the cost of these guys by 5 points. And honestly, I would do that probably for some of the other shooting units as well. Not so much the bowmen, but also the longbowmen, I think, because mounted knights, household knights, for an extra 5 points are typically a much better choice. Longbowmen, once they get charged by something long range or shot at, they die very, very easily. They're very slow to pump out the damage with just volley 2 and barrage 3, excuse me. So realistically, you're seeing mercenary crossbowmen in many more lists than the longbowmen, although they have a potential. Again, I'd still take them because in a very large list where you've got like 3 units of crossbowmen out in front already, and you still have more points, and you want to put longbowmen in there, that could become a very good gun line because they're not blocked off by anything. So that could be very good, but generally it is the crossbowmen. If I haven't really talked enough about the Hunter Cadre already, I'll just go over and just say a little bit about them. They're monster hunters, and because brutes and monsters are so popular in the meta at the moment, you're almost always going to find value out of them. They're really not going to be great against other 100 Kingdoms players, which will only have brutes and monsters, but if you're playing in a local meta and you're going to tournaments and you're the only 100 Kingdoms player, these guys are a pretty good pick, and they are reasonably affordable. You don't have to make them veterans. You can have the Imperial Officer in there if you're not going to put them with the heavy infantry, and having armor piercing 1 is really, really nice. Again, mercenary crossbowmen still on a slightly higher tier than these guys, but very, very useful in that sort of meta, again, where you're struggling against stuff that, big creatures just moping their way towards you, and you've got time to shoot them, or you've got something else in your army to act as an anvil. Let's say you've got Gilded Legion, which they're going to run into and spend a while attacking, and then a Hunter Cadre shoot over the Gilded Legion at the brutes who are size 2. That can be extremely, extremely effective. Right. In fact, let's just stay with the Imperial Officer just for a second. We've talked about most of these units here. The Militia Bowmen, I'll just briefly go over them. This is the cheapest unit in the game. There's nothing else that costs 75 points or less. It's the cheapest unit in the game. They have the worst stats in the game. There is no unit that I can think of that is less effective in terms of actual combat than these guys. At Volley 1, they do almost no damage by shooting. In close combat, they die to a stiff breeze. They are resolved 2, does the defense 1. They run away. So there's an argument for saying that this is the worst unit in the game, and that's partly one of the things that makes them a very good unit, ironically, because let's think about the basic fundamental things that you get from just putting a regiment on the board. You get a card for your stack. So if you want to have more cards than your opponent, meaning you get the last say every turn, you get a whole bunch of regiments that can activate after your opponent has run out of cards, the Militia Bowmen are a great way to do that. If you need more screening units to get in the way of your valuable, vulnerable stuff, nothing in the game can afford to trade with Militia Bowmen. They're cheaper than anything else your opponent can take. So if you're just worried about a charge, like if your opponent is the kind of person who has invested 500 points in a unit of Cataphractoi or Household Knights or Centaur Avatar or something like that, and they're just going to try and mow you down, but there's a 75-point unit of Militia Bowmen in the way, that is just horrible for your opponent in so many different ways. Even other things like normal monsters and normal regiments, if you're just double marching your militia in the way of them, so they have to charge and then clash you, and they charge and then march and they can't kill the thing behind it. Getting your bowmen just in the way in an awkward position or blocking them off from moving on to objective can just be so clutch. The reason I don't often take bowmen is just because even at 75 points, I can find something else in the army which I really want to spend the points on, and they do take up a slot in the warband. I still think Militia Bowmen are useful in these larger lists where you're going for like 16 activations, for example, and you're wanting to sort of just pad it out and have more regiments there, and you've got a few other powerful units in the background that can do the work. Militia Bowmen can be really good in that regard. But I don't really think of them as like a shooting unit where I compare them to bowmen, or any other kind of longbowmen or militia crossbowmen, mercenary crossbowmen. I purely think of these guys as a speed bump. They're just a filler unit, like a blocker, a screen unit. They are cannon fodder, they're expendable, they are chaff, but they are better at that than anything else I can possibly think of. So they are worth having in your collection. Like I would like to buy some for myself that I haven't already. Guild Legion are the one unit in the faction which have pike formation. So these guys are very, very good at blocking a charge from anything that relies on impact hits. So if your opponent is taking a lot of Household Knights, Cataphractoi, that kind of thing, these guys shut them down very, very well. And the Imperial Officer, if he's giving them double time from battlefield drills, or if they just simply have a drill master in there, that means they can march 16 inches if they include the standard bearer for the additional 1 inch. And they can march directly in the way of something. With Vanguard from the Imperial Officer, they can come on from the side of the board or from the back and just get right up in front of where your opponent has deployed their cavalry unit, making them very, very strong. They, in my opinion, are not as good as the Steel Legion because inevitably you're going to have some games where they're just battling against another enemy regiment that does not rely on impact hits, and they're going to cut through the Guild Legion a bit too quickly. Again, at the end of the day, you're just like a Wounds 4 unit, and you're going to be suffering from Cleave and Terrifying and all of that. And the Steel Legion is just going to brawl better with Oblivious to survive for a little bit longer, Bravery in case you get broken, and the Cleave 2 is just absolutely brutal when they can go up to an extra attack from the Drill Master. So in terms of brawling and stuff, the Steel Legion, in my opinion, are the better heavy infantry to take, and are very well supported by the Imperial Officer. There are some people who believe that the large block style of 100 Kingdoms is the way to go, in which case you take an absurdly large amount of them. You don't really need an officer at all, maybe the Drill Master for the extra attack. You take Relentless Drill, and then the officer is going to take the buffs for infantry here, and most likely Armor of Dominion. When you're spending that many points on a unit, you're going to want to sort of really break the bank and go all out to protect them. So Armor of Dominion, you might even consider taking Long Lineage and putting Standard of Steel in there as well, which is just an absurd number of points, but it makes this unit almost unkillable, really, and with so much support in there, it's going to be devastating. I think the way to play this is that you really have to have the Noble Lord in there as well to get the reroll sixes, just to get every last bit of value out of them, and then the Noble Lord himself is going to be doing a similar kind of build here with the Arms Master, and the same thing we talked about earlier, where he's just going to take weapon arts like this, getting up to 8 attacks with eccentric fighting style, and that way he's going to be spending time near to the Imperial officer and giving them the buffs. I personally prefer Steel Legion, and the other way to build Steel Legion is really to have 2 small units of them without any upgrades at all, really, maybe just the Standard Bearer because they need to charge. And then because in a very large list, you're going to be very well screened with everything else you're taking. So note that in this sort of setup, you can have 2 small units of Steel Legion with no officer upgrades. The Imperial officer here is going to very cheaply put the Bastion and the double time on them. So he's only 90 points there, and you've only spent 650 points on this setup. That allows you to then build a list which has a Mounted Noble Lord plus, 4 other units of Knights over 2 different warbands, or you can have like 2 or 3 other warbands with heaps of Militia Bowmen and your Priest and your Mage and your Noble Lord on foot, and that way you can have like 3 warbands full of troops, and you have a big swarm. It's sometimes called a Goblin style list, and having the small units of Steel Legion do that. You don't really want to take like 3 units of Gilded Legion because they have support too. They want to take advantage of the back ranks. Elsewhere, let me just see if there's anything else that I wanted to comment on. I've mostly gone over Knights. Mounted Squires I'll just talk briefly about. This is a regiment you can only take with the Noble Lord, either on foot or the horse version. As I mentioned, the Mounted Squires are restricted for the foot version and mainstays for the mounted version, which is what allows you to have an army list which is all cavalry, which is viable, by the way, if you go Mounted Noble Lord and you take Squires, and you take Squires, and you take Household Knights, you take Household Knights, you can have this set up with the Noble Lord being the Warlord and Veterans, for example, and you build out the Knights, and you then take a second warband of just this kind of stuff. Or more commonly, you'd then go over to the Sealed Temple here, and you take the Sealed Temple, take Sealed Temple, take Ashen Dawn, take Ashen Dawn. And note how you can actually afford all this quite comfortably. You've still got, 370 points left to build bigger units of Knights, to put upgrades in there, to give them Standard Bearers, and you know what to do. So this is a perfectly viable and very strong army list. And if you're the kind of person that likes theme and having like everything on a horse and painting up your army with all the horsey banners and stuff, this is actually a very viable build. It really does work and is actually quite strong. So don't be afraid to try and collect an army like this if you want to. I don't think this is the best build in the game, and I don't think it's perfect in every matchup, but it's just straight out viable. But part of what makes that sort of build viable is the Mounted Squires being the mainstay unit here. These guys are one of the fastest things in the game. There is the Speed 10 monster for Spires, but a Movement 9 is not to be scoffed at. With the Standard Bearer being free, you can march 18 inches plus 1, so 19 inches. So they're good at really getting around the board. The thing they do best is they march up turn 1 and increase your reinforcement line to bring on things from the side. If your opponent ignores them, you may potentially get around the sides and then charge them from the flank, where you get rerolls on everything for opportunists, which is what makes them good in combat. But if they can't manage that, at the very least they're a relatively cheap unit which can tie up an enemy range unit or can just increase your reinforcement line. If you can march charge them into a unit of like 4 marksman clones, which are going to just be absolutely peppering you for the rest of the game, that can be very, very effective. Or if you can even just keep them in your backlines for a while and wait for a chance to sweep around a unit that's already fighting and just attack the other unit in the flank, that can be very strong. In that build I just talked to you about, where there are 8 cavalry units, these guys really have to be your screening units, because what's inevitably going to be happening with a mounted list is you're going to be receiving some charges, which is not going to be very comfortable for you. So having the Mounted Squires in front to take the brunt of that and just use them as an expendable unit to then countercharge with your fast, powerful stuff is going to be what they do. So yeah, you can take this Count Palatine, not particularly useful. I mean, it just gives them Inspired. They're going to have Inspired anyway from charging or using Inspired as an action. Sometimes it means that you can use your first action to clash with Inspired, kill the enemy unit, and then march out of the way. So it's sometimes helpful, but the main thing is that it's only 10 points. So if you're running a veterans list, you only pay an additional 10 points to have the +1 clash, which is, I suppose it's kind of useful for them. If I grab veterans here, so yeah, veterans there, always take the clash. Don't know why you take volley. Makes this thing 20 points, and the clash can be useful when you're using opportunists and your impact 1, which is not really the best, but it's something, so you can get that in there. Alrighty, coming down to Priority Commander here, there is one regiment called Order of St. Lazarus. Typically, unreleased units get changed before they come out, but I'll just quickly comment on that these guys feel like they're going to be sort of like super militia with a like religious infantry, which aren't really like the elite Order of the Swords, but they're a bit sort of smaller scale in the sense that the Defense 2, Evasion 1, Clash 2, they seem a bit poorer in that regard, but they are faster, they have more attacks, same number of wounds, Resolve 5 is amazing for 100 Kingdoms. Cleave 1 is very useful, fearsome corner case, but they're not having to waste points on having counterattack, for example. So this seems like a kind of a cool unit. The thing that interests me about the design is the additional stands are only 35 points each, because at Clash 2, supporting attacks are very weak, and missing out on stands being in contact for attack 6 is not great. But it does allow you to have a larger unit relatively cheaply, and then you could put your character in them, for example, Priority Commander, or you can just really have this as just a straight up combat unit that your opponent can't really afford to be charged by if it's receiving the buffs from something like the the Noble Lord's Best of Men, rerolling 6s, or if there's a priest nearby to put Blessed on it, or if you have the Priority Commander in it with that combo I told you about, like Glimmer of Faith, where they get Blessed from the other side of the table. The other thing is that the Priority Commander himself, with First Blessing from the from the Supremacy ability, will give these guys a turn where they can reroll. So if you charge them in, they go up to Clash 3 with Inspired, and it's 6 attacks each. If you've got a row of like 5 of them, 5 times 6 is 30, plus the leader for 31 attacks. At Cleave 3 with rerolls, Cleave 1, Clash 3 with rerolls, that's where they become really dangerous. So I think that this is a very interesting unit. The thing that really bothers me about them is that they are they're a restricted unit for every character that can take them. So sadly, because Order of the Ashen Dawn are so good, you always want to take them when you have the opportunity to. So regardless of which character you're putting in there, you've got the mainstay, and then you pick one of these 4. And because Order of St. Lazarus is not a mainstay unit for anything, you're always wanting to go for Order of the Ashen Dawn because they are so brutally good. And that's the poor design there. I'd change it so that for Commander Order of the Sword, you can take this as a mainstay unit if you want to, instead of Order of the Sword. So that would be the change that I make there. Or make this a restricted unit for Theist Priest, where the Theist Priest is not looking at Ashen Dawn and thinking, oh, I'm going to take that instead. He can't take them. As a restricted unit, you can take Order of the Sword with Theist Priest. If that was the case, I think that would be much more viable for the unit. So let's get on to talk about Order of the Ashen Dawn. This is still the best regiment in the game, in my opinion, even after being nerfed. They previously had Wedge, they lost that. Their additional stands are 80 rather than 70, that's been changed. But the pure fact that you've got a unit that has absolutely ball-busting stats, Clash 4, Attack 6, Wound 6, Resolve 5, Defense 4, Fearless, and Impacts, and Cleave 1, and then they're Blessed all the time, means that when they're attacking you, you're typically going to get crushed. There's very little that can withstand a round of combat from these guys. And when you try to attack them, they are surviving unless you've got like Cleave 3 or, Smite or something like that. Or if you're shooting them with AP2 or something like that. Blessed is just so much more powerful for every additional point of defense you have. And if you don't have any way around their armor, let's say you do 20 hits on them, You know, they're saving 2/3 of those, and then they're rerolling to save a further 2/3 of those. And at Resolve 5 with Fearless, they're hardly ever failing any Resolve checks. So it's just so hard to grind them down. The best thing against these guys, in my opinion, are things like Caryatids, which have really long range and AP2, or something like the Behemoth from Spires that has Siegebreaker Behemoth, or whatever it's called, has smite attacks, or even other 100 Kingdoms army with Militia Bomb from the Elysian Fragment. It's hard to get around them, man, and that's why everybody tries to spam them. And one of the most popular builds at the moment really just is this Prior Commander with 2 units of Steel Temple and 2 units of Ashen Dawn. You could even take a whole new warband of just this, but a lot of people just go to that plus the Imperial Officer, and then you just take, you know, the units that you really like, Steel Legion or Hunter Cadre or Guild Legion, and you make that the warband, and you get 2 units out of them. The way it used to work is that people would take 2 units of 5 Ashen Dawn, which you can still do. You just pay an extra 40 points or something compared to the last patch. And it's just so hard for people to deal with this unit. Most games of Conquest are broken down into sort of 3 fronts, where you've got your left flank, your right flank, and your center. And if you've got like 1 unit of Ashen Dawn for every sort of section of the battlefield, they're this absolute tide-turning unit which comes later in the game, just can't be stopped, and they wipe it out. I've won so many games just because this unit has just eaten 3 units in a row, and it only takes 3 stands of them to do that. Plenty of other ways that you can support them. The mage, of course, if you make her a warlord, that can be pretty nasty. Obviously, the blessed ability here, they already have blessed, but when it doubles up on them, they get a +1 attack, which is crazy, or hardened. With blessed itself, you're typically using it for armor. You're almost always using it to reroll the defense rolls. They're so accurate at attacking anyway. Like at a Clash 4, if they inspire, they're rerolling the 6s anyway. They don't really need the blessed. With impact attacks, they're hitting 2/3 of them without brutal attack. You don't really need to reroll those, but you could if you're not expecting to have to be attacked that turn. You may as well. And as I mentioned, the 15 points for the banner, not always necessary, but if you're taking a large unit of Ashen Dawn, you probably should. Very, very strong unit. I wouldn't be surprised if they get a further nerf eventually. But yeah, one of the strongest builds you possibly can make with 100 Kingdoms is that. One of the unit I haven't really talked about very much is the Sicarii. This is another unit which is similar to Men-at-Arms in the sense that they are a medium scoring unit that is relatively cheap, but they cost an extra 35 points compared to the Men-at-Arms. They have lethal demise, so they are obviously these fanatical sort of priests, religious nuts, these zealots, which throw themselves into the enemy, probably carrying like fire or something like that. And lethal demise is a good rule against other enemy units which are low defense. So if they're charging you with, say, Inquisitors from City-States who are Defense 2, Evasion 2, they will easily kill your Sicarii, and hopefully you'll reflect 12 hits worth of damage back to them, which might kill a stand. So that can make them very good at trading. With Devout there, they can be very good with the Priest casting spells onto them. Cleave 1 is always nice, but at Clash 2, that's quite hard to get a lot of hits out of them. Resolve 4 Fearless is actually quite good for an early game unit. I think that this is a great unit to be taking on like carries from Old Dominion, because they're going to be making you save on your Resolve stat rather than your Evasion 2, which is very good. Speaking of Evasion 2, that's going to mean they have at least some line of defense against a lot of armor-piercing shooting and spells and cleave attacks. So they are pretty good. I think if your only goal is just to have, units at the back camping on zones, Men-at-Arms are clearly better at that because they save you 35 points. But if you want more screening units, which are going to see some combat and cause some enemy units headaches, the Sicarii are very good. And of course, if the Theist Priest does become better one day with Spirit Shines being a more viable tactic, then Sicarii are going to be really useful. You can also go for a massive brick of them where they are just going to get even more lethal demise happening. And hilariously, if you've got a mage elsewhere in the list, you could try for School of Water, healing them if they're going to survive for a while. And that's going to mean even more lethal demise damage. So if you're going that route, it might even be worth putting some defensive abilities on the Priest. I don't really know. I guess you could still go Elysian Fragment on the Priest in the Sicarii too. That probably works in the same way the Militia we'll do it. But again, Sakai probably may get a few changes when they actually get released, and I don't know when they're coming out. Good. Okay, I think we've pretty much got through most of the units. I know that I haven't covered everything, but I think I've done a reasonably good overview of the faction. Before we finish up today, and I know it's been a long video, I just want to talk you through a few army lists which I typically go for. So let's just quickly go back and do a review of some of the most powerful builds you can currently have. Order of the Steel Temple, Order of the Steel Temple, Ashen Dawn, and the only standard bearer is going to be the one that has the priority commander joining it, and for the masteries we'll take centric firing style. So this particular unit here, which is the fastest one, can march, charge, and then you can actually get 8 attacks in a duel, or if they decline it, they have penalties, but in the next turn you can try and challenge them and then activate your horses then. This is actually going to be a Relentless Drill list, because what we're then going to do is grab the Imperial Officer. He's already going to be a Warlord here. Imperial Officer is going to simply take Men-at-Arms and Crossbowmen. Nice little scoring unit there. And we're going to take the Steel Legion and the Hunter Cadre. And the idea here is the Officer can be a Warlord. He can take Eye of Achilles, which is really nice for giving the Hunter Cadre the reroll 6s, so he's going to join the Hunter Cadre. They're going to have an additional stand there. And the Null Mage, which I didn't really talk about, is something which can cause enemy characters to take wounds when they cast spells nearby, but you've got to get to within 10 inches of them, and that's why I don't really like the upgrade, because it's going to be very rare that you get all the way across the board to where their spellcaster is. It sometimes comes up, but not enough for my liking. 5-point Standard Bearer, not bad. Steel Legion, I think a unit of 5 can be very good, because then 5 wide can actually be just the number of stands which can touch an enemy unit of 3, which is the most common size for enemy units. And we still have a few points left over, so if we wanted to cut it down, we could then go and take a mage and, for example, a unit of crossbowmen in there. All we'd have to do is drop, say, the Steel Legion down a little bit, and we have enough to have the mage in there with the School of Fire, and that's another backup shooting unit. So you can have this sort of style of list where you've got the really powerful stuff in here, but they are supported by other units which can sort of screen for them and buy time for them and score in the background. So that is one sort of strategy which you can approach for 100 Kingdoms. The other build which I'll show you is one that some people really like, which is the triple block sort of idea of it. That's where you have a very large unit of Gilded Legion. Let's say we take 7 of them. Command models, take the Drill Master, I believe. We are going to go Relentless Drill. And we're just going to make the Imperial Officer really good at blocking for, helping the Gilded Legion defend. So that's all he really needs, I believe. So you spend a lot on the Gilded Legion there, but then of course you have the other warband, which is the Noble Lord, and he's going to take a lot of Household Guards because they're his main units. We can take a unit of 7 of them. Arms Master for +1 Clash, of course, Standard Bearer. He's going to be the Warlord, giving them more reroll 6s, hopefully within range of the Gilded Legion as well, which is why we're going to need... We're not going to need veterans as much, but Relentless Drill is free and it helps us exceedingly well, because Household Guard and Gilded Legion start at support 2, they go up to support 3, giving us tons of attacks from the back. We can take a unit of Longbowmen, and no, we can take a unit of Household Knights, because they're just a really cheap scoring unit. And then we're going to go over to take the Fierce Priest, and we're going to take a massive unit of Militia. We're going to take 7 of them, which is going to be terrifying for most opponents, because even if they have the toughest thing they can possibly take, they aren't really going to survive this priest unit touching them with Elysian Fragment. And again, this is a large unit of militia. They start support 2, go up to support 3 with Relentless Drill. If they're nearby to the Noble Lord, they're going to reroll 6s. They're going to have Blessed, at least on 1 turn. Reroll 6s is going to be more for defense, so even if this unit gets attacked, hopefully enough of them will survive to attack back. For example, if you lose the Supremacy roll, you can still use a Legion Fragment that way. So I've got the bulk of the list mapped out, and I still have another 500 points, which is just insane. So I can start filling it out with small units to, how should I put it? These guys are effectively going to be blockers and screening units and little shooters and things. So how are we doing? I've still got 75 points left. So I could do this. There you go. Oh. if I take this, there we go. In fact, I've gone over by 10 points. So what would I drop for the 10 points? Mercenary Crossman, 1 unit of something here. I guess I could drop down 1 ability, or just 1 unit. Like if I wanted to take, for example, 6 militia, then I've got another 80 points in there. I think you guys get the gist of it, though. This is a big army, and you have got a lot of regiments, so your opponent's is going to be outmaneuvered by a lot of smaller units here. But the 3 bricks of 6 militia, 7 household guard, and 7 gilded legion, because they're so well supported by faction abilities, they're going to kill just about anything and grind anything down. So your opponent is going to be put out of position when they attack. And if they're trying to be really cagey and trying to pick off your smaller units slowly, you at least have a few shooters in there. So you've got the crossbowmen, longbowmen. To a lesser extent, the militia bowmen aren't going to do very much. The spells the priest might. But this kind of setup is very nice for doing that. Another way you can build here, and another build that I'm really looking forward to trying, is just the minimum effort mounted noble lord, where you've got this sort of setup where the noble lord himself is the warlord. He's going to have Oliphant's Roar, and he's going to support just 1 unit of knights. So this singular unit of knights here is going to have an additional stand, and they all get standard bearers for free, which is lovely. And we're just going to have the basic men-at-arms here. So you've got this warband here, but then you're going to take a secondary mounted noble lord with a couple more like basic troops. Crossbowmen, always nice. Then we're going to take another 2 units of knights. Notice how cheap this is. So we've still got all of that there. We've only spent 1,300 points. And then we're going to take this 3rd unit, which is going to have the Imperial Officer in there. Again, we're going to take even more guys. So we're going to take another Men-at-Arms unit. We're going to take, I don't know, another Men-at-Arms unit. And then we take 2 units of Steel Legion. We still have 45 points left. He's going to go for battlefield drills, take the infantry ones, because he hasn't taken any shooters there. The Steel Legion are each going to get a standard bearer, just purely so that they can charge from behind the walls of crossbowmen. So this is, unless we've got 3 units of men-at-arms, I don't think we need that many, so I'm going to take this one away and put the crossbowmen in instead. So we've got 3 crossbowmen unit, which is just devastating. Your opponent has to close the gap with them and attack them, but you've got all these knights behind the crossbowmen, and the Steel Legion are behind them as well. And if you need to go to your opponent, because they're hanging back with their shooting, you can stick back with the men-at-arms, or even just a 1 unit of knights, and you can camp just about every objective zone on the table. And for the attacking and the charging that you're going to be doing, the Noble Lord, because it gives all 4 knight units +1 impact and reroll 6s, they can do a little bit of damage there, and you're not even needing to use veterans. So I'm quite keen to try a list like this and report back to you guys. Note that we still have 25 points left to spend on something, which I suppose would be the 20 champion for the main Lord's unit, because he's got Oliphant's Roar in there, so you really need this unit to have max threat range. And with Oliphant's Roar and the Supremacy ability, 20 champion, 4 knights plus the Lord duelist, this is the one thing in your army which is going to do a lot of long-range damage. You need something to do the work, so it's going to be these 2 units of Steel Legion here. Everything else can't really fight, but being able to outmaneuver them and chip away at them and have the mercenary crossbowmen doing so much damage makes this a very, very interesting and viable list. Cool. All right, I think we'll call it there. There's plenty more to discover with 100 Kingdoms, plenty more to learn about them, but I hope you guys have gotten something out of this video. I am quite keen to do videos for all of the other factions in Para Bellum's wonderful game, Conquest: The Last Argument of Kings. 100 Kingdoms being my favorite faction, the one I played the most, so logical to start with them. But please give me a like, give me a subscribe, and leave me a comment telling me what your thoughts are on 100 Kingdoms and anything else you'd like to add. I've got through as much as I can. Can't cover every single detail. Can't quite get everything right. But I hope you guys really enjoy this wonderful faction, and good luck with your games.